This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Maximus. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, stretching your retirement dollars on your behalf.
Our CFO always says every dollar we don't spend is a dollar that remains invested in our participants' accounts. And so if we don't have to spend it, we don't.
Jim Kaplan of the TSP on FedGov Today in just a moment. Uniting program strategy, advanced technology, process, and execution for a more efficient government. That's Maximus. Every program, every service, every time. That's innovation forward. Learn more at maximus.com/federal. The fourth quarter of the fiscal year is usually when a lot of spending happens in the federal government, but that's not true one place. Jim Kaplan's Director of External Affairs at the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. Jim, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I read that 88% of your budget has been executed for fiscal 2025 for a spend plan target of $465 million. You've committed $411 million of that. What does that mean to you and your colleagues inside the TSP, and how does that inform the way that you go about executing the rest of the budget over the rest of the fiscal year? Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Francis. Yeah, the key here is that for each of the last 5 years, we have executed below our budget. And unlike a lot of federal agencies, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our participants and beneficiaries to spend their money wisely and to not spend it if we don't need to. Our CFO always says every dollar we don't spend is a dollar that remains invested in our participants' accounts. And so if we don't have to spend it, we don't. We're really proud of the fact that our budget is, as we reviewed it for the next 3 years, will be either going down next year or generally flat over the 3 years. I don't think there are a lot of federal agencies that regularly cut how much money they're spending in their budget, or ones that regularly are below 90% execution. And a lot of times, in my experience in federal government, it's been, hey, as we approach the end of the year, let's make sure we're meeting our budget goals. Here we really look and say, does spending a dollar make sense? Because if not, let's keep it invested for our participants.
I mentioned that the spend plan, this target this year is $465 million on an original approved budget of $500 million. And I see that relative to that, you're asking for $490 million for fiscal 26, $503 million for fiscal 27, and $501 million for fiscal 28. It doesn't sound like there are any big chunks of things happening like happened in the years that led up to Converge. Is that a fair assumption on my part when I look at the top lines, Jim?
It is. We had some expenses during our transition to a new record keeper, but we've maintain those, and we're finding new ways to be efficient. One thing we've done is we've asked people how they prefer to be communicated with. And for those who want electronic filings, we can send them their quarterly statements or their notices electronically, and that saves a little bit on postage. For those who still want to receive it in the mail, they can receive it in the mail. We pay for upgrades to the system, so obviously we budget into our system the fact that we're going to have the in-plan Roth transfers next year, but then we might not have as many upgrades coming up the following year. So in any given year, we take a look at where are we going to spend, where are we going to invest our money so that we're good at protecting and investing our money wisely.
To go with that $490 million budget request for fiscal 26, I read these agency priorities. Maintain high levels of confidence and trust in the TSP, support a high-performing workforce by being responsive to employee needs and concerns, enhance the retirement readiness of participants, continue the pursuit of continuous improvements in agency operations while maintaining a strong cybersecurity posture. I don't hear anything there that's terribly radical, Jim. Those sound like all very noble and desirable priorities. What are the underpinning events or priorities or actions that you expect the TSP to take in the coming year to be able to implement and execute on those four priorities?
Well, we develop a 5-year strategic plan for the agency under our leadership, working ground up, reaching out to all of our personnel ideas and preferences and focus and where we can make improvements. And we're reaching the end of that 5-year next year, and we'll be developing our upcoming strategic plan. But it really is to focus on areas where we see the greatest return on investment and the greatest needs. So, for example, we're one of the few agencies, we are green on FISMA, on cybersecurity all across the board. Wasn't always the case in our history. But for a number of years now, we've focused on improving our cybersecurity posture, and the results have shown. We've had our audits come in and show where we made our improvements and that we're meeting all the requirements because we know we have an obligation to safeguard and protect the accounts of our participants and beneficiaries. We're constantly looking, as we've talked about over the months, for constant improvements, whether it's moving to the use of the app on the phone to make it easier for people to access their accounts, or whether it's moving to the in-plan Roth conversions, or some of the requirements that were put out in Secure 2.0. So we're constantly making those improvements and looking for feedback from folks on what we can do better. And we've done a lot better at providing service for our participants and looking at how we can be that as a high-performing organization. We talked previously about how we now identify people who are calling in multiple times on an issue, and we can send them off to the right person to make sure that it's better responded to quicker. Or people whose checks are returned, and we've cut in half the time it is to reissue that check by proactively reaching out to them and saying, hey, we see that a payment we sent to you wasn't cashed or was rejected electronically. What's the error here? How can we improve that? How can we get you the funds that you've requested from your account?
We've talked a couple of times, Jim, about Converge, and you referenced the issues that the switch to Converge caused and that you've rebounded now. I see that overall participant satisfaction with TSP interactions above 93% now for a full year. June 2025 participant satisfaction 93.99 and the Thrift line 94.04. What do you do on an ongoing basis to continue to try to drive that satisfaction level up?
Well, sure. First of all, of course, we train and work with our contract to train those people and provide them the information they need to be able to answer those questions quickly and accurately. And so reducing call time has improved. We're actually making use of new technologies. AI, we're not using to answer the questions as often, but what we are doing is using it to transcribe the notes of our operators so that they spend less time doing the paperwork and more time taking care of the needs of our participants and beneficiaries who call in. So we're finding ways to make that more efficient, quicker, and make sure that people are getting their phone call answered, their question answered online, their email responded to, and getting them the information they need. Finding more conversational ways for the information we provided, as opposed to just, if you ask this question, we automatically send you back this paper. Maybe we search across 3 or 4 of our papers and provide you the information that really answers the specifics you're asking about. So we're constantly looking for ways to improve that. And as I mentioned, the ability, if somebody's called in multiple times on an issue, to immediately elevate that case to somebody who can help them rather than sending it back just to the general call.
I also note some numbers here that I think struck me as a little bit counterintuitive. Maybe they don't mean anything at all. General purpose loans up 4.8% for June, down 4.1% for the first 6 months of 2025. Is there any significance there, Jim? Or are they just is that just the normal churn of things?
There's the normal change, but the interesting thing is to compare it to last year and see that the loans this quarter versus how many people were taking out loans last year at this time are down. Now, is that people are not making actions that they need to borrow a loan for? They're not making the home improvements, or they're not taking that extra trip, or whatever it is that they need to borrow money from? Or is it because last year was a particularly busy time with weather or whatever else it may have been? The key here about our loans program is twofold. One is, remember that everybody's repaying their own account. So we sometimes get people going, oh, that process hasn't worked, or I'm paying back too much, or I'm not paying back enough. No, you're paying it back to yourself. You're not borrowing somebody else's money. You're borrowing your money. But when you do borrow that money, it's not growing with the markets for you. So as much as you can avoid borrowing the money, you're doing yourself a long-term good. And so the fact that loans are slightly down in volume this year versus last year is probably a good thing for people making long-term investments in their future.
All right, final thought. You and I talked a little bit on the show last month, and then a little bit more after we ended the show last month, about something that's I've never been able to figure it out. You have a lot of folks in the TSP that are invested in your life cycle funds. And I remember when I was on Federal News Radio and I was doing the show with Mike Causey, it was called Your Turn, and people would call in sometimes and they would say, yeah, I have this much of my account in a life cycle fund, and I have this much of my account in the G fund. And we would have financial planners and stuff on, and they would go, well, then and then the person sometimes would ask a question about rebalancing and didn't really understand how their account was balanced because there's already some G fund in their life cycle fund, no matter which one of the life cycle funds they're in. And you get the idea. And so when you and I were talking last month, I said, I wonder how many people are really doing that, how common that really is. And God bless you. This one took a little bit of research. What did you find when you went back and looked at how many people there are that actually do that, Jim?
Sure. So as we've talked about, lifecycle fund, especially because it's the default now for new people joining the TSP, has really grown. And 55% of all of our accounts now have some investment in an L fund. And 40%, it's all in an L fund. And of those people, it's overwhelmingly just in their one L fund for their anticipated year where they're going to start withdrawing their retirement funds. But that means that there's about 1 million of our participant accounts, or about 15%, that have an L fund and something else. And while there's no real research and we're looking more into why that happens, it just struck me as I read investment news and the advice columns that everybody else reads, that a lot of times people say, well, take some of your money and put it someplace safe. And some of it, put it into a little bit more aggressive work in that rebalancing. And if you're thinking of your TSP account as multiple pots, I can understand how some people would say, well, sure, I've got all of this in the L fund, but I'm going to take a little bit and be more aggressive because my L fund money is what I'm relying on. The money I've got in the L fund is my long-term plan. And if I take 5% of it and put it more into the C, S, or I fund, and that grows great, and if I lose that, fine, because I know that I've got the largest portion in that L fund, so I'm just slightly increasing my risk. Now, you're right. The L funds are already designed to be a fix it and forget it. And for the first 4 years, they're not even putting money in the G fund or the F fund. It's really as you start approaching retirement that those percentages increase. And we've put out those asset allocations that are done on a quarterly basis as you approach retirement. And move into an L income fund, which, by the way, is not entirely a G fund. There still remains some percentage of money, a little bit over 20%, in the equities market to try and help you counter inflation and to continue to get some growth in your retirement account, even as most of it is in the safer G funds. So you can just leave it in an L fund. But as I've thought through it, I can see to myself why some people would say, I personally have some money still left in the private sector from my time outside of government. And I say to myself, you know what? Let my advisor there manage that a little bit more aggressively because I know I have the TSP to be safe with. And so I can see some people who have all in the TSP saying to themselves, I'm going to be a little aggressive with this little pot of money because that's my fund money, but I'm going to leave most of it in the L fund because I know that that's my long-term investment.
I always appreciate your insight and the research that you do to help me understand stuff, and I'm grateful for your time today, Jim. Great to talk to you again.
We appreciate it. Thank you, Francis.
You can read more about the TSP on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. The revolutionary FAR overhaul is underway to reform the federal acquisition regulation. The Office of Federal Procurement Policy and the FAR Council are leading the effort. One of the architects of the overhaul is Larry Allen, Associate Administrator for the Office of Government-Wide Policy at the General Services Administration. He's on FedGov Today TV this week to tell you about it. You can watch the debut on ABC7 in Washington and on the FedGov Today YouTube channel at 10:30 Sunday morning. If you missed the debut, you can watch anytime at fedgovtoday.com and on YouTube. The next FedGov Today podcast is coming Thursday. To make sure you don't miss it, follow the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows. And you can always listen on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. I'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening.